Welcome, everyone, to Hedgebrook's Cottage Chat for October. Here we are in October. This year has gone fast. I have the honor of hosting these joyous conversations and amplifying the brilliant minds of our ever growing alumna community. Thank you all so much as I see you come on and join us this month as we talk about the creative practice, the classroom, and more with Mira Jacob and Jocelyn Nicole Johnson. Super excited that we've got these two in the same room together. I'm interested to see where the parallels and cross sections are between their two lives. Mira is a novelist, a memoirist, an illustrator, and a cultural critic. Her graphic memoir, Good Talk, a memoir in conversations, was shortlisted for the National Book Critics Circle Award, longlisted for the PEN Open Book Award, named a New York Times notable book, as well as a Best Book of the Year by Time, Esquire, Publishers Weekly, and Library Journal. It is currently in development as a television series, rightly so. Her novel, The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, was a Barnes& and Noble Discover New Writers Pick, shortlisted for India's Tata First Literature Award, longlisted for the Brooklyn Literary Eagles Prize, and named one of the best books of 2014 by Kirkus Reviews, the Boston Globe, Goodreads, Bustle, and the Millions. They know that Mira is brilliant. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, Electric Literature, Tin House, Literary Hub, Guernica, Vogue, and The Telegraph. She's an assistant professor at the writing program at the New School and a founding faculty member of the MFA program at Randolph College. I tell you all of this, but what I really want to tell you is one of the things that got me through during the pandemic was Mira's curated conversations, fictional conversations with Bill Murray. If you didn't catch it on Instagram, I highly recommend you go back through and get what you can of it because it was wild. I was also madly impressed and moved to act in a very concrete way by her call out for support in India when the pandemic ravaged that country. And all the Lululemons out there who needed to give money and show that they supported the culture that they were appropriating from. I'm just saying, Mira's kind of a badass in case you haven't gotten that. Jocelyn Nicole Johnson, also a badass, unsurprisingly. Jocelyn is the author of My Monticello, which, yo, if you haven't picked it up yet, I was unprepared. That's what I'm going to say about that. A fiction debut that was called A Masterly Feat by the New York Times. I agree with you, NYT. And finalist for the Kirkus Prize and the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Prize. Johnson has been a fellow at Tin House, Hedgebrook, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Her writing appears in Guernica. See, Guernica knows what's going on. The Guardian, and elsewhere. Her short story, Control Negro, was anthologized in the Best American Short Stories in 2018, guest edited by Roxane Gay, who called it one hell of a story, and read live by LeVar Burton as part of the PRI's selected short series. A veteran public school arts teacher, which was fascinating to me to find out because we're going to talk about it. Johnson lives and writes in Charlottesville, Virginia. I am so thrilled that they are here today. We'll be with them in just a moment. My name is Amber Flame, and I am the program director for Hedgebrook, as well as an alumna of their Writers in Residence program. I'm so thrilled to be your host for this conversation, which is streaming live Thursday, October 20th, 2022. Hello, welcome. I'm so glad you could join me, both of you.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So you all don't know each other very well. And I want to leave space. You don't know each other at all, other than, did you hear all the crossovers though? I was like, this is fascinating. It's almost like your circles have touched and almost crossed many times. And I'm so glad you came together for this.
Yeah, I put your book back there just because I'm a
Hey.
that's so great. Thank you so much. Did you see that when I posted about this, did you see that one of my students wrote back right away? I got 7 responses from people like, that book, my message.
Oh, no, I missed that. That's wwonderful.
People are in a fever about how much, and Amber, you just had a moment too, but I feel like when people talk about your book, they're in a fever about it. They're having a moment.
Well, that's a perfect place to start because okay, Jocelyn, look, I work at Hedgebrook. There's some brilliant books that just come, that sit there on my desk, and I try to work my way through it. And I've been reading a lot of Black female identified writers, right? Just on purpose and intentionally. And so Tomi Adeyemi and N.K. Jemisin, Nnedi Okorafor, I'm reading this stuff. And then I picked up your book. Really, I was just at Hedgebrook for a couple of days working, and it was there on my desk, and I was like, oh, sure, I didn't bring anything with me, so let me pick up one of these. I fell into that book and could not get out. And when you left, I'm gonna stop because you really should read this book. When you left us where you left us at the my Monticello, that story, I was hurt. I had to process my feelings. It was so real and so quick. Like your movement of time is a study. And just thank you for writing that. And it was hard and wonderful. And I just got back from NOLA and went to the Whitney plantation and just had this whole like resurgence of like, what does it mean to be walking in these footsteps? What does it mean to be walking in this place? So please, if you haven't read my Monticello, definitely do. It will take your breath away.
Amber, I have a question for you about that.
Mhm.
I have a theory with when a book is that good, and I'm talking about this exact specific ending that you're talking about too. I feel like instead of coming to the end of a book, you almost fall through it. Like
Yes.
you can't stop, right? There's just a sort of a place. I feel like
Yes.
that's what happened to me with that book. And I'm wondering if you had that feeling as well.
Yes, like there was no
Monticello, like,
resolution, there was no closure, there was no ending allowed me as the reader.
yes.
And I don't want to talk about the stories, but I'm just saying, me as a reader, I did not get to end it. And it was wild. I don't know. I think it was reminiscent of how I felt when I read Kindred, right?
Mm.
Octavia Butler, right?
Yeah.
Where you fall into it and then you're like, what happens in a cycle like this? That
Mhm.
is, yeah. Whew. Okay. I'm trying
Well,
not to get too many spoilers away.
you're making that is. Thank you for reading the book. You know what? I don't know if you all feel this way, but if you make something and anyone cares at all, like I've made
Anyone.
a lot of things where literally maybe someone cared, but I certainly didn't know about
Yeah.
it. So it's
Mhm.
like it's really it's just really nice, and I really try to appreciate it. It's hard to appreciate it. It's weird, but when you make something and it means anything to anybody, so I really appreciate that from both of you. And I wanted the end to be open. I love short stories, so I love endings that like leave you in with something that you have to sit with and work with.
That's
Yeah.
um
The
it,
thing
you
that
were
it does, I feel like, is then it makes you write the ending across your life, right? It makes you just like look into your world and keep writing and keep writing and keep writing, which is kind of the best possible outcome of reading.
That's exactly that. Like I'm so excited. This is your debut, yo. That's the other thing, is that like I'm like, how do we make sure that this person writes more short stories? Because it did engrave. I have not been that haunted by somebody else's work in a while. And I don't say that lightly. Because I get haunted by work pretty easily, actually. So but like usually there's some kind of like, disassociation, almost like I've been thinking about how much we consume through social media and through like, I binge watch. If I watch a show, I'll like watch the show, right? And it goes so fast, and you follow these emotional arcs so quickly with characters that you like I will often find myself, like, when I do turn it off, that I've gone through this journey and put myself through a ringer that isn't even mine. It's a fictional ringer. Or the worst is when they like are telling a fictional story over what happened in 2020, and the protests and the murder and the masks and the fear and all of that. And I'm like, why am I putting myself through this? Right. So books have become, once again, my comfort, where I can take my time and I can process, but that allows me that little separation. And I wasn't allowed that in that story. I was earlier on, but then it was like you kind of like ensnared in the earlier shorter stories. And by the time we got to the novella, it was like, oh, we're in this now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so well done. Please write more.
And I want to just say, and I don't know, Mira, if this is true for you too, or Amber, for you as a creator, even though that's my debut book, I wrote like all kinds of stuff that just didn't get published.
For
And
sure.
so, like, I think I'm happy this is my debut book. I think it was the right book to be my debut, but it's interesting when it's your first book, but I'm 50 and I've been writing for 15 years.
Here's all my manuscripts.
Yeah.
So we ready to go on these yet? Yes.
But now I do feel like I want to write forward as opposed because I do have other
Mm,
things I wrote, but it just doesn't, they don't feel like they're the next thing after the thing that this is because the world's
mm,
changed so much, like, and not for the better in some ways in that
yeah.
15 years,
Yeah.
which I think, I don't know. Even just from reading Good Talk, that seems similar. Just that striving and that building up to is really a lot of people's stories, let's just say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that things have changed. I don't know how you feel. I feel like things have changed so quickly in the way that you were just talking about the way that you can watch a whole season and you can get the shape of a season. I feel like suddenly I can get the shape of a life almost. Like things are happening so quickly and things are so compressed that I'm like, oh, that was my 40s. Okay. And it looked like this. You know what I mean? It's like really weird. It was really weird. Started strong, went to a really weird place. That one coming. But also like you, Jocelyn, I have also been writing forever. I always say this to my students because I wasn't published until I was 40 and I had been trying to be published for 20 years before that solidly, like solidly sending things out, solidly getting rejections. So I hear exactly what you mean. It's like this is a very cooked thing for a reason. There was a whole person that you were becoming through the course of these stories and long before them. And that makes a lot of sense too. Just for the richness of your stories, frankly, it makes sense when you say it that way.
Yeah. And I think I know that I don't know. I don't know if you all feel this way, but I was really ambivalent. I really wanted to be published. And I knew that sense of like even trying was going to make my work better. Because as soon as you have to send something out or you have the sense of audience, you pay attention to the words, or if you have to, Lord forbid, read in front of people, I can see their expressions. You're reading that really differently. Like, at least I am. I'm like, does this sound right? Like, I can cut that whole part out, you know? And so
right.
I think that you want that sense of audience, you work for it, but then it's all that in between that is so important to make the work good. And like, I really am thankful for that time. And I think it's hard to appreciate when you don't, like, if you knew at the end, eventually you'd find your audience. But in the end, that kind of all you have is the thing you made. Like, even when it goes great, when it goes terrible, what you have control of is so small. It's like that the work on it has to be, you have to find a way to make that enjoyable. Or at least that's what I think. That's what it feels like to me, you know?
One of the reasons why I wanted to pair you was because last year when we got to work with Mira for a Vortex intensive, I was so um, inspired as a creative person to have her bluntly and transparently reveal, like, I worked on this forever. I didn't know if it was going to happen. It took so long for it to happen that I was doing the work meanwhile. Like you said, I was like, you're like, I didn't just be like, oh, here's a book, and this is my first attempt. You like have been writing and writing and writing. And I want to dig into that a little bit deeper. It's also reminding me during our writers conference, during one of the industry talks, Hashenda Sanders was talking about getting this advice from Gloria Naylor, I believe, who said, like, don't publish anything till you're 30. Like, you don't know anything. You don't know anything to publish till you're 30. And I think about how we're told to like get on this wave and ride the wave and push through and make all the things happen and get into our business mind once we put something out. And my next book of poetry is coming out next year, and I look at my first book of poetry, and people are, thank you. I'm excited. I'm very excited. I'm like, skim over, but I'm really excited. And my first book came out in 2017, and I read it, and people are like, I got your first book. I'm so excited. And I'm like, ooh, my first book. Not because I'm embarrassed by it, but because I've grown so much that I'm like, this is not what you're gonna get as I continue. Like, by the time this next book comes out, we're in a different time zone. We're in a different reality. And I want to talk about, like, do you go back to that work? Do you try to resuscitate it? Do you try to, or do you pull what was important thematically, or do you just go, that was then and this is now?
What do you think, Mira?
Oh, I have a whole feeling. Like, I have a whole feeling about this. Because one thing when you were saying, like, when don't publish before you're 30, I feel differently in that the thing that I work on for myself is forgiving the process. Like, one of the things I had to write Good Talk honestly, I had to kind of come to, I think, a pretty natural conclusion that hopefully not too long in the future, it will be outdated and people might feel like I was really backward about some things and they might be furious with me. And I might even look at it and be furious with myself about various things I didn't see or understand about how to be in the world, or how to think through things, or maybe even how to think through them with more compassion. And so I remember having a moment where I was like, you're just going to have to be okay with this. Like, you're going to have to be okay with the fact that you didn't know it all and that the conversation is changing. And the reason I say that is because I desperately want the conversation in America and specifically around race to change. So if I want that future for us, if I want that future for my son, right, then I have to sort of get behind the idea that one day I will look back on myself and be perhaps a little embarrassed for what I didn't yet know. So that's one thing I would say about that. But the other thing is that when you look at old work, I do see that I try not to get too down on the sentences, that kind of thing, you know, when you're like, oh God, your sentences were so weird. I try not to do that, but I try to look for the kind of core of like, what was I always? What was I always? Like, because I do think we all have a calling in our work, and the most alive I feel and the most secure I feel is when I'm actually answering to that calling, rather than did I get on this list, or will this please that audience, or can I get this to that publisher, all of which I didn't build a career on because nobody was publishing me early. I built a career on no one knows that you're a writer, but you think you're a writer. What is your call, right? What is calling to you specifically? And I find that when I go back to that, I can write my best work, and I can also move through the world in a way that is much easier for me. I'm curious, Jocelyn, what about you?
I love that. I think when you say that, it makes me think of things I would tell my young art students that I then had to tell myself while I was going through the process and all the roller coaster. I think I totally understand. It's like extremely human to look at what you've made once other people are looking at it, or look at something you've made in the past and see what's imperfect about it. But I kind of try to flip that in my own head. I'm not always successful, but I think about it as nothing's imperfect and it's not supposed to be. And I'm not purely going to know. I don't know. You were talking about when you're talking dialogues about race with your child in a very specific time, it should be of that time. And there shouldn't be an expectation that you're purely going to be right, or that there is even a right. I mean, there is a right, but that it can be formulated without context. In other words, the world's constantly changing. How we feel, the book I wrote is going to change a year from now before it was published, it changed because we had the storming of the Capitol. I wrote it in a time before something had happened, and then something had happened, and then more things happened. And so I think we really do have to be, we don't have to be, but we should be more, not forgiving is not the right word, but just open with ourselves and recognize this. It's like an album. You put out an album of that moment. And I think it's fun to have albums of your 20s. It's like looking back through a picture album of yourself in your 20s, and you're like, why did I wear that? Also, you're like, why did I look so like my 20s? I didn't realize I was like the good things too. It's all the things, it's just life. And it's just like kind of beautiful. It's like you're making things. You're not the thing you made. You're making things, and that core piece, what you said, really struck me. Like, I do think that we have a core piece that is the same. Like, I look back at these stories and I did pull from some of those earlier things in ways I just have tendencies, like just bits of characters, little moments, bits of feeling, even though I wasn't writing about the apocalypse or, race in the same way in those earlier stories. Some of those ideas are absolutely there. It's really interesting to look back. And
yes.
And I didn't even intend to do it. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm going to poach this. It just is there because I'm me, and that's this strand through it. And I like that idea and way of thinking about it.
I had to stop and comment. You're making things. You're not the things you made. I love that. Also, looking back on my 20s and being like, why did I wear that? And then having my kid be like, so can I have some version of the same thing? And you're like, wow. It all comes back around too. And there's a cyclical nature to the themes that come up. Do you feel the calling, Jocelyn?
I don't know if I would describe it that way, but I definitely, I mean, kind of. I don't know. I'm compelled to make stuff. I'm compelled to think about stuff. It comes out a certain way. And, before this, when I was working on these stories, like towards the end, I think before maybe I'd had an agent, I'm not sure, but my partner, who's super supportive, was finally like, maybe you should just take a break, because I was working full time. I was so tired. I was like working on the stories all the time. We have a chat, we have a teenager at the time. He was a 16-year-old now, but younger then. And so he was like, you just seem like you're wearing yourself out. And then I like sold the book, and he's like, can I make you a sandwich? This all worked out, but it was like so long working at it. You know what I mean? It was like a really long time. And he's an artist too, and so he got it. It wasn't like a dismissal of talent or anything like that. It's just like, it's just a lot of work to keep at it. So I guess the fact that I did keep at it, and that is, I feel like that's a calling, just doing it, just like continuing to work at making something that you hopefully is better than you are in the end. Like you're kind of trying to make something that is beyond you, like is better than you can make. You're kind of just pulling everything and just, I want this to be, at least in this case, especially when I got to the novella, which was the last thing I wrote, I was really thinking about kind of my worst fears and my worst worries for us, both like racial anxieties, environmental things, and just trying to like exercise those, and kind of like a horror movie, like watch the scariest thing. I wanted to like deal with my scariest things like in a journalized way. And so it wasn't always pleasant, but it was cathartic in a way, honestly.
Well, you put your finger right on the biggest fears. There were a lot in that little that there were a lot, I was like, wow, you're reading my mind about some of this stuff. Do you think of like, I think it's so interesting. One of the things in that story especially is this idea that you don't necessarily get to choose who survives with you. And I think that's weirdly that's almost the vibe that I got when you were in these conversations, right, Mira? I was just like, these are the people. You're not going to be like, well, this group gets to stay and survive and make it to freedom, and you can just wipe out this group, right? How do you address the apocalyptic, how do you address the dystopian, the apocalyptic in your work, and what saves you from your own fears in that?
Say the last part again. What
saves you from your own fears? You said you looked at your fears and it was cathartic. What made it cathartic?
I think what made it, well, for me, what made it slightly cathartic was that now that you're worrying about it, Amber, like I literally was like, and you can
wow. Okay. So just, yeah, I love that.
It's like a horror movie where you passed it on.
Exactly. There's one, It Follows or something. My husband's like, you need to watch this. Yeah, you give it. It's like, I'm worrying about all this stuff. And I think so much around race and environment is unspeakable, which again is why I love good talk. Like it's unspeakable, especially, I don't know, even to our own self sometimes, even when we know it, even when we're dealing with it, there's only certain ways it can be spoken about. It's hard to even show vulnerability around it sometimes, or it's just hard. It's just hard to speak about for a variety of reasons. And so to have that conversation with yourself about it, to write into trying to figure out how to be, and also in that story, I kind of was trying to write a little utopia in the apocalypse. So I was trying to think like, how do you respond to this like obscene, horrible, racist horde, and this movement and this energy that is very much alive, unfortunately. In this moment. How do you respond to that? Like I spent a lot of time thinking about that during, August 11th and 12th in Charlottesville, and we had the Unite the Right rally, and then the year afterwards, and going back to my, young students who are like, that just happened, like just into my son and all the things. And so in the story, I was trying to think about, you respond by having women respond. Like I was like, there's going to be there's going to be a group of women who are really strong, and the feminine, not just women, but the power of things that I think of as feminine, whatever that means. But like, they're not just they're gonna fight. But they're also there's gonna be an emphasis on like creating something worth fighting for. And, they're like making things, they're gardening, people are having sex. It's not just like a war scene, Anyway, so I just wanted those things to be present in the story. And also, what else is going to be important? Like, not only is it women, but brown and black people are going to be respected leaders within this moment. And like the main leader and the protagonist of the story is a young woman who's a teacher, just like someone different than you see at the center of that kind of story. And so, and there's a garden, and there are seeds, and there are chickens, and there are a diverse group of people who didn't choose one another, but do choose one another. There's basically like found family, and they're going to make that decision. So I was trying to put in it like the seeds of like the possibility of something different that could be somewhat hopeful.
You just made me think about Stonewall, where I was like, right, it's, the Marthas and the Sylvias who like build that community. The Stonewall riots happened because women, feminine energy, women identified people stood up and said, no more, I'm not doing this anymore. And that inevitable, the accidental leader, where it's because you have the ability to instruct and inform. Mira, I would love to hear, we're going to talk about the teacher thing too. Don't worry, I'm going there. But I would love to hear about you. How do you embrace catharsis out? Make it cathartic to address the apocalyptic, the dystopian?
You know what's so funny? I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday, because she's revisiting something that she wrote at an earlier time in her life, and it's much more pressing now because the world has changed, and because when she is now rewriting passages, we were just sort of laughing on the phone. She's like, okay, so now I feel all of it, that feeling. And I think that there's something to me that feels really, God, don't want to sound corny, but sort of sacred about moving into a space where you get to have a little bit of a bloodletting with your own fear. You get to just say like, this is it. This is exactly what it looks like. This is exactly what it feels like. These are all the things and all the ways they occur to me. And you get to really name the thing. I feel like nothing is scarier than the unnameable fear. But when you get to name it and you get to really look at it and you delineate it and you say, it looks like this, it looks like this, it looks like this. And even when you are creating it into a fictional space, that's the best part to me about fiction, is that you can really give it all the attributes it needs to have, right? You can really create something that really mimics that. I just wrote a passage about writing a new book, and I wrote a passage about a woman, an Indian woman, who has an affair with her white boss who denigrates her horribly. And it was actually amazing to write that passage because I could really get to the heart of something of what it was like to work under white men for all those years, and what it was like to see them reach for me in a very specific way. And I'm not talking about for an affair, but I'm talking about for like a sort of sexualized version of understanding my intelligence, right? And how demeaning that was, and how as a young woman, I couldn't even hold on to it. I couldn't even get to it. But now, as a 50-year-old woman, I can say like, oh, it was that, and it felt like that, and it felt horrific. And that part of it, right? That part of holding on to it, which I know you're asking about the apocalyptic, but that to me is also like the kind of personal apocalyptic.
Absolutely.
Holding on to that part of it and really being able to say, this is what happens and this is what it feels like, to me feels really energizing and really helpful. Like it's helpful to all the girls I've ever been, right? It's helpful to say it out loud for them.
Wow.
Mira, do you get vengeance in your work? I feel like I'm constantly trying to, like if something sticks with me, I really am a nice person, but like if someone does something that like really bothers me and it sticks with me over the years, I often find it in my fiction,
Oh
like
yes.
because like what
100%.
you're saying, just all those moments of like where you're in this power struggle that you can't even name, but then to be able to name it, it feels like a little bit of vengeance.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, to imagine this man, I was actually imagining, when in the 90s, I had an employer who found out that I was part of a group called the South Asian Women's Creative Coalition. And he was a white guy from Yale who was so furious that we would have this space that he kept trying to figure out where we were meeting. And he was like, I am going to go to that. It is so outrageous that you would have this. It is so unbelievable. Like he was so furious about that idea that he kept threatening to come to our meetings. And it was like, what universe are you not invited into, sir, that you feel so threatened that we should just have a corner of it to ourselves to talk to each other? And so part of this thing that I'm writing now, like I directly, I know that guy is in there. And there's nothing that no one else would be able to connect him to that guy,
Right.
but he
No,
knows he's in there. The poison of his intent is in there, right?
Oof. The
That's
poison of his intent. I love that. And Jocelyn, I'm loving this smile that you're getting. You're like, yeah, there's a
no, I
glee to
love
it.
that's so great. I love that. I totally relate to that.
That's amazing.
in Good Talk, there is, I mean, it's actually from my life, but there's a long chapter called Imposter Syndrome about a white woman who hired me to write her great book idea, which, as it turns out, was not even an idea. But I changed a lot of the details of who that actual person was. But the essence of the story is true. The essence of the story is she hired me to do a job. And when I was able to do it, she assumed it was because I was stealing her mind and her power. She couldn't imagine that I would come to any table with my own, right? And so getting to write and draw that was absolutely a catharsis. Like really, like I remember sort of finishing it and just being like, okay, wow, that one, and just sort of looking around the room like, are the demons out? I mean, how are we doing in here?
That's beautiful. I had this moment where I was just like, I have been working so hard on like surrendering the fact that I can't predict or control how other people are going to behave or respond. That I have to like winnow and refine what I'm asking for or the conversation that I'm having or whatever it is. I have to winnow and refine it to like, and I expect nothing from you because I don't know what I will get, right? Like I'm like working on release and surrender, and I'm like, no, I just need to write fiction in which I can completely control everything you say to me in response to this thing I want you to do. It's there is some I'm like, oh, there's some glee there for sure, and I get worried about manifesting. I get worried about like, what if I put it onto, you said you get to write your deepest fears. And I was like, I don't want to just say it. I'm afraid that that will make it happen. And
oh man, I mean,
come on, jump in.
With my first book, it's about a father who gets in a kind of an accelerated Alzheimer and dies. And my actual dad started dying in the course of my book. So my mother, in her very mother way, was like, things you write in this book seem to happen. Do you think you've killed your father? And I was like, what?
Woo! Woo! Mom!
Oh no!
I know. Do you think
just thought that?
Oh my God! What have you done?
Oh no!
But also, it's my mother, and I love her so much, and she says unbearable things to me kind of regularly. So it was just sort of like, oh, Ma, you really stepped in that one.
You're like, it's a Tuesday.
Tuesday, decades of therapy ahead. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Wow.
Oh my gosh. That's why you were saying, are you going to manifest it? That's why you do both. You talk about the things you worry about the most, but you also like give the character the friend that you wish you had, or the moment clarity. You can do it all. Like it's not all. It doesn't have to all be the negative stuff. You can also
that's true.
the best thing.
Well, yeah, like you said, that they would gather together and they would plant seeds and there would be chickens and like right, like I was like, right, there were those things in the story as well. And I mean, I think one of the things that is so wildly thrilling and disturbing about the book is that we could absolutely see it. Like I don't want to manifest that, but it does seem very along the path that we are currently being barreled forward on, so that was part of the like, oh my gosh, and then but I think of the astrologers and how they're saying you can focus on the trash fire, you can focus on the Pluto, retrograde of the United States and what's being restructured and broken apart and destroyed, or you can focus on the world you want to build from that destruction, because we're
Right.
gonna have to
Right.
build. And so, what do you want to build? I thought of that with you, Mira, where you said that too, of like, but what do I want to build? What do I want this to go towards? Um, Before I do want to mention this, because one of the reasons why I was also excited to put you together is I'm a teacher. Like, I remember being in high school and being the teacher in like AP English, where the teacher would say something and the kids would be kind of like, what? And I'd be like, he means blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, right. And my teacher's being like, you should be a teacher. And me like, never. Don't wish that on me. I don't want it. I'm a reluctant teacher, shall we say. I know I can be very good at it, especially if I care. And I'm better at caring with adults now than I used to
Mhm.
be. But I mean, I've done toddler music, I've done preschool story time, I've done the range, right?
Toddler music. Oh man, hats off.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's just egg shakers and three chords on guitar. It's really simple. Um, but I think what I've been the I know Mira, like I came into Hedgebrook knowing about Mira Jacob as an instructor, because I've heard about the things that she's done for Hedgebrook. And then I knew that you worked at the new school, and that was once upon a time where I was going to pursue an MFA, right?
Mhm.
It's been a dream institution in a lot of ways, and I love what they do there. Um, and their staff and faculty are phenomenal. So, and then working with you last year, this is part of Jocelyn. This is part of why we wanted to get you on the teaching. We're like, so you want to do something for Hedgebrook? And you're like, I could do a cottage chat. Because once we get you in, we know what we have there. And I just learned so much. I keep bringing back lessons that I learned from the one intensive that I got to do with Mira as like a support, not even a participant. And I think one of the things I'm noticing, you've won an award. There's so much joy in your presence on social media around the people you teach as well.
Yes.
um Not just you, Mira, but Jocelyn too. Like there's picture your students love you, is what I'm getting from this, and that has to come from a deeper place than I have for teaching, because it's not like something you're doing while you're waiting to become a writer, or while you're hoping something else pops off. It's something that you've like dedicated craft and intention towards, both of you, in very different fields. So I would love, like, am I reading this wrong and you're just like, no, give me a book deal and I am out of the classroom forever? Or is there, what is the joy that you get, and what is the creative juice that you get from that? To me, which a major output of emotional and creative energy goes into teaching, and I find it hard sometimes to replenish. So what is that for you? Both of you, please share. And Justin, would you start?
Yeah, you're gonna laugh at me because I'm not teaching anymore.
Oh, good for you. I'm sorry, I'm happy for you, but
But it's no. But I taught public school art for 20 years in Virginia. I absolutely love being a teacher. I did all the writing in this book while I was teaching. And but for the global pandemic, I probably would have continued to teach. But when I sold the book, I was like, we're in a global pandemic without
yeah.
vaccines. And I was like, I think I want to see what's going to happen with this book. And I'm thankful I did in this sense. It's been really nice to have some space to come talk to you all on the Zoom, and because public school teaching is so relentless in the schedule
Yeah.
that it would have been really hard to launch the book and do some of the events and things that I have enjoyed being able to do, because it's going to pass. Like, this is just like the paperback, the hardback, the paperback, and I'll still do things, but it won't be like this. So I wanted to have this moment. And so I'm glad I have. That said, I absolutely love teaching. I was made to be an elementary school teacher. I'm like, I had a chime, I had the cardigan. It was like Mr. Rogers. I really believe in it. And I actually put a lot of it in the book, the novella in particular. When I was thinking about how these people were going to create community, I kind of used what teachers do. On the first day of school, when you have to sit around and make a list of like, what you have the kids say, what should we do in our classroom and how should it be? And then write it all on the paper. And then the teacher like secretly is like manipulating everyone to say the things she wants them to. We all sign off and it's everyone's document. I kind of use that because what do I know about making a utopia? What do I know about making community? I know it from being in classrooms and having like 500 students and having them over years. One school I was there for 6 years. So I saw kids come into kindergarten and leave 5th grade and then their siblings coming through, and that feeling of continuity, and like you build something. And then if it gets good, then the kids already know it's good because they heard the other kids like it. You can get it to that. It's hard. It's like, you're rolling it uphill, but then once it starts going down, there can be this way in which they're like, I know that's fun because I saw how other kids felt about it, or I'm looking forward to doing that thing I saw other people do. So I really love teaching. I really, I miss it. I miss little kids. I miss being around little kids because they come with, they're so honest. Like they can't help but be honest. They're basically like, this is what you got. Work with me. And with art making, no one cares what we do over there. It's great. Like you're like the little subversive into the corner. You don't have an SOL. You absolutely have standards and ideas and things you're doing, but you have so much freedom in like who you put in front of them, what artists, how you reflect people who look like them and different than them that they're going to be in conversation with, and how you can put 3 slides up on the screen that are 3 different people who are dealing with the idea of home. And then the kids like absolutely are smart and they get that. And they can say like what they see in it and what they notice. And if you give them that opportunity, they can be really excited about it. So I love teaching, and I'm happy that in this next phase, I've been able to talk and talk to people. I haven't taught a workshop yet. I don't know how to give a craft talk. I'm going to be calling Mira because I don't know what I'm I don't know what I'm doing. I've done all this.
Listening to you, I think you probably know more than I think you probably know a lot. Do you know what I mean? I think you probably would know how to teach this. If I were to ask you 5 questions, I feel like you'd be like great at it. Just even from how you're breaking things down right now. Like you've got natural, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, it's so embarrassing to be like complimented online, but you have like a natural teaching cadence, right? Like you have like a way of sort of even breaking things down where I'm following everything you say. So I'm going to actually be looking after this.
Teaching little kids because they're a hard audience because they won't be quiet if you're not succinct. Do you know what I mean? So I think I could do it. I'm saying I just don't have the experience yet, or I don't know how to form it. I know that I could. I know I have knowledge. I know that I've taken in. So I've learned from so many teachers. I've learned from so many other writers. I've gone to so many things, but I just haven't like turned it around and been the person. Like I want to sit in the classroom and be doodling and like get to be the student. I really like being a student actually with the writing things. So all that is just to say, I feel like I'm getting a little bit of it going in. Like I read the book to a bunch of high schoolers in Alameda High School. Like they had an auditorium of 1,700 teenagers. Like that's the most people I've ever spoken to at once. And it was so exciting and thrilling because it was teacher-like. And then afterwards, like talking to students and going to a class and it had that feeling like it was a little bit full circle. So I'm hoping to incorporate that more into whatever my life looks like going forward, whether I go back to the classroom or whether I find a way to make that more a part of now, this writing piece.
Yeah. Have you thought about teaching people our age? Because I think there's something so valuable about the thing that you were saying where you were writing for a long time and this was your debut, but you had been doing a lot of living and writing before.
I think I would actually really like to teach people.
I think it would be valuable. Just to put my 2 cents out there, not that you're asking, but like I think that's invaluable. I think of that as that's the one thing that I think I can bring to the table. And I try to bring it as often as possible, because I do feel like I spent so many years in the shadows and feeling like my life of writing fiction was an act of fiction itself. No one knew I was a writer. I was working in a corporate job, and I was writing every night from like 11 to 1 in the morning, but no one thought of me as a writer. My partner was a filmmaker, and everyone knew he was a filmmaker, but nobody really knew what I was trying to do. And that specific thing is something I try to teach to a lot, because I think, first of all, I think my calling is to specifically really be trying to reach women and people of color, because we are so shut out of so many different spaces, and because we never feel, even when we're good at things, we never really feel, there's always some little bit of dangling knowledge by design. There's some feeling that, oh, there's something else I have to know before I'm really allowed to be in this space. And since I finally got into the space, and have realized, like, oh, there was nothing. It wasn't that you weren't good enough. It was never that you weren't good enough, right? It was literally about the opportunities and what that looks like. And so now that you know that, and now that you know that it's not a meritocracy, and now that you know it's not actually about who's the most talented in the room, how do you teach people to be writers? Because that, to me, is the most essential thing. Like, you're a writer, whether or not you guys know this, you're a writer, whether or not you get published. And when you are a writer, it means you are living your life in a different way. It means you are showing up for your life in a different way. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And most of the teaching that I do is really around that, around trying to find those groups. But I'll tell you guys, so I also helped start this program. It's a low-res program in Randolph College. It's an MFA program. We started in 2018. And it is very dominantly marginalized community teachers. All of us come from different spaces. Everyone is pretty wildly talented. But the thing that's so cool about it is that they're teaching me how to teach. And they're teaching me how to teach the things that I care about. I know how to teach a craft class. I know how to do a workshop. I know how to read work carefully and ask questions to lead a student forward. Like, that is stuff that I can do, and I feel like a lot of people can do. But the thing that is harder, like the questions that are harder, are how do I write the truth about my life when I know it's going to decimate my family, right? How do I write that? How do I bring that into the world? How do I take it out of my body and bring it into the world? And also love myself through that, and love the people around me through that. How do I do that? And those are the kinds of things that I think that community has been teaching me to do, because they're, it's so funny. I think about them. Kaba Akbar is a poet that works over there, and he's one of those people. I think there were 6 of us that founded the program, that we were having really soulful conversations from the get-go of, like, what is the purpose of this place, and how do we bring our full selves to this? And the thing that is really different about that space for me in particular is this feeling that I've never had to be nicer or dumber than I am to get things done. I can just be myself. I can just come in full bore and get things done. And I can be the teacher I need to be to the students. And I don't have to worry about what that says to a larger administration about what I think about myself or what I think about them, which is, frankly, that we're all excellent, right? I don't have to worry about what that might unnerve in other people. And that has been, you were asking a little bit before we got on about joy, Amber, and that I just keep thinking that has been my joy, right? I'm going to turn 50 in January, and I'm actually going to be teaching, which was funny because my partner and I talked about it. He's like, are you sure you want to be teaching? And I was like, at that place, I do. Because that's where I feel seen. I feel like that's in an ideal world, it would have always been that way for me, right? In an ideal world. And I don't mean to oversell it. Like, I don't mean to say, like, nothing bad happens. It's not a Shangri-La. That's not it. Plenty of stuff happens. All sorts of racist bullshit happens. That's not it. It's that we have a way to talk about it, and I have other people that are invested in doing that work and teaching forward and learning from each other. So anyway, that's sorry, that was a really long-winded answer, but that's
No, that was beautiful.
How do you balance teaching, that kind of teaching and writing, like how does that look in your life?
Not
I
Come
well.
on, asking my questions, Jocelyn. I love it. Go ahead.
want to know. Like,
I
I
do
literally
too.
am like, let me get a Post-it. I'll be taking
Yeah.
Go
So
on.
I work, yeah. I will just say honestly, sometimes not well. I have dialed down to about 60%. And I have also I've been, one of the things that I've done a lot lately is I've counted my untallied work, right? I've counted it for myself. Like I've recognized it for myself.
Hmm.
Like a lot of students of color come to me with all sorts of stuff, and I never counted it before. I never thought like that's actually a whole other course you're teaching on the side. You are teaching a full-time course on how to walk through the world and keep yourself together. So now that I know that I have to teach at I know I can't take on so many classes. I have to take on very few select classes and lean into those. And I have to do things like I have to, just if we're being totally bare bones about what that looks like, it means I have to find another income source. And for me, that's giving talks, right? So I have to find a way to do those two things, because then they're both they can be different kinds of depleting, but I have to do them at the right caliber. So at the end of the day, I come back to my writing. I'll just say right now, I've had the best 2 months with this of my entire grown life. Like I've got, I think 3 thesis students right now, and I have 1 class, 1 workshop. That is the least I have ever taught, and it is exactly right for me. And my class is on a Monday, and the rest of the week I'm writing for myself, and that feels like a miracle. It feels like I feel like I really figured out something this time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that it comes down to space. You have to insist on space for yourself.
Mhm.
And for I love that question because the answer is never like, well, you just do it. The answer is always like, well, if you're lucky, you have some support. If you maybe you have a partner that can help, or you can take some time. Like we've had lots of different answers, but none of them is like I do it all by myself and I just fit it in.
No, exactly. That's not it. And also, I feel like counting the unpaid labor is essential. It's essential.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Especially essential for women. It's essential that you count it to yourself. And you're like, that's a job I'm doing. And I got to count those like those are hours, whether or not I'm getting anything from that. So you know what you've got left, right?
And that's how to walk through the world and keep yourself together. That was the quote. Like that's a course. And it's so real. I love that you've taken on one of the things we started talking about, and then we're like, no, hold. And so Jocelyn gets here because we started going down this road of like, one of the things I noticed with Mira is it's not, even with the assistants that she works with, because I'll get an email back from her assistant. We were talking about a new assistant, and it's not just an internship or a job. It's a mentorship. That's how she models it. It's like, this is a way for you to get to know from the inside what this life entails, and then they go off and be creative. And I mean, once again, kudos and thank you for the modeling of like, there's a different way to be in community because we need each other. And I didn't, and some people said, well, I didn't have it. It's sort of like the student loan conversation. I had to pay off my loan, so you should have to pay off yours, right? Like, instead of going that route with it and being really precious about like, I had to make it by myself, so you need to make it by yourself. Mira has done this thing where she's like, ask me. If I know, I will tell you. If I can share, I will. And with boundaries, with really good boundaries, is saying, and I'm not always accessible to you to ask me. But if you have a moment, ask me.
I love that. That makes so much sense to me.
So for you, Jocelyn, I want to ask you, what is like, I mean, Mira, you shared so much about like, I didn't know these things, and I'm not trying to be like, I'm not a closed door, and you should ask the questions. We modeled, I was telling Mira before, we modeled a lot of what we've done on Mira saying, you need to be talking to writers, talking to other writers, talking to, everybody in the industry, as well as many people as you can, and ask the question. They might not always answer you, and they might not always give you something that's helpful to you, but asking the question and getting as wide a variety of answers is also important, and part of your job as a writer that wants to be putting your work out in the world to an audience. which is different than being a writer who wants to just write. So, Jocelyn, I want to ask you, if you could tell yourself or somebody
Mm.
that you were mentoring um, anything about what this took to bring this book into the world, or what was the most supportive or the most helpful thing that you learned along the way that you just wish somebody had given you instead of you having to earn, what would it be? And there might be many. You can pick one.
Well, I mean, the thing that comes to mind first is you have to know kind of what's the core of what you're doing, like what you're making, so that you can protect that. I mean, I think for me, towards the middle, I started off like with a really strong intention. And then towards the middle, I was like, was kind of like chasing the thing that people are like, it seems like this, and trying to make it fit more with whatever the world was asking of me. But
Mm,
then after I had like several agents and several things not sell, by the time I got to, okay, I'm writing these Virginia stories, when people said insane things to me, I didn't feel a need to try to change what I was doing to meet them. So an example would be, I had an agent say, you should write, these stories seem pretty good. You should write 2 novels. Write 2 novels, and then we'll come out with this story collection that you're. And I was like, bitch, are you crazy? I'm sorry.
for real. I'm glad you said it.
Oh my God, are you kidding me? But I didn't even entertain it for a second. I was like, it's been nice talking to you. I wasn't even mad at them. I was like, you're obviously not the person who's excited about these stories. And if they come out as me putting them on Substack, or if they come out as a book, or whatever they come out as, they're not going to be what you're saying. I'm like, I'm not going to try to fit myself into this idea that you have. And what I want to do is find like some partners that are excited about the thing, that the heart of what it, like, you have to be open to, you don't have to be, but you should be open to learning from people. And you should be open to people reading your thing and telling you something about it that's helpful for you making it better. But you have to know what's essential to it and what the core of it is, and if you don't know that, you're going to be chasing, even just in workshop, you're going to be chasing the approval or the ideas of other people. Amy Bender, I took a 10 house workshop. The first like big workshop I went to was 10 house, like when my son was like 1. So that was like 16 years ago. And Amy Bender was our teacher, and she drew a chart on the board where she had like a segmented line, and she was like, here is listening to everyone in workshop and trying to do everything they say. Here's listening to no one in workshop. And you should be, and she kind of put you a little closer to listening to no one. She's like, you should be about here. And it was like really good advice, because it was like, be open to what people are saying, but you know your work, you have to interpret it through like yourself. And I think I got to that more with the industry too, with this idea of publication. I know what I'm trying to do, and I'm not going to be whipped in every way. And if it doesn't happen, it's not going to happen, but it's not going to be for me retwisting this into something that you all think it's supposed to be. Like, that would just, I would be sad. If it got published, I would just be really sad. So that was really
Thank
helpful.
God for us. Thank God you have that, right? I don't want those stories any other way.
Yes,
I
for real.
don't want that book any other way.
And then I found like, people who were excited about it and who were interested in it and who didn't want to change, have the ending be, I had someone ask recently, did anyone push back on the ending? And I was like, no one that I was working with. Like, and part of that is luck. I mean, sometimes you just have other people around. You might not be able to find those people. So that might not be on you, but it's not worth, you have to know what's precious to your piece and protect those things.
I love that. I saw you agreeing vigorously, Mira, to that, the holding on to the core.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always think that that's the dance, right? That is the dance, is like, how do you hold on to the core and receive information that keeps you in conversation with your work, right? Because it's not, you can't just hold on to the core so tightly that you can't hear anyone. Like, how do you kind of make yourself that thing where you keep the core, but also you stay in conversation about it? All of my work has been made much stronger with conversation, and even conversations that I was like, that was stupid. It definitely, right? Like, it definitely, there was some part of me that was like, okay, it was stupid, but here's, you know what I mean? Like, it also helped me understand that this is what I want and this is how I'm going to move with this. And I think that's incredibly helpful. I agree with you.
Yeah, and it helps you. What I always think about, I would like to lead a workshop because I actually love it. Kind of reminds me of being an elementary school teacher because you're like creating this safe space
Mhm.
where you're, I don't know, I just like that idea. I feel like there's nothing more satisfying than having people carefully look at something you made or have people carefully read something you've made. And even if they have like a ton of like feedback that isn't exactly what you wanted to know, if they're genuinely paying attention to it, it's like very pleasurable. It's like very, very exciting and interesting because no one pays attention. I'm kind of an introvert and I have all kinds of thoughts and ideas that no one has access to except for in my writing. Unless you're like my partner or my kid to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
there's only parts that I'm going to show in these certain, so it's like a whole nother level of, or just a different view, and not even just a truth view, but it's just a view into different things that I wouldn't necessarily want to have a conversation with you about. So to have people be able to look at it through the writing is really
Oh,
fun and satisfying.
so interesting. That's an interesting way to think about it. You've both been so generous. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I want to keep asking you questions, and I promised Mira's very efficient assistant that it would be an hour at the most, and we're at an hour and one. So I'm going to end it. But I do want to say thank you so, so much, both Jocelyn and Mira, for joining me today. I love these conversations so much. They bring me a lot of joy. I hope they brought you some joy. And this is going to live on our YouTube channel. We have a whole playlist of cottage chats, and we watch people come back to these, and I watch them again and learn something from it every time. So please feel free to share, both of you to share, and anyone out there, if you were inspired by this conversation or want to return to it, you can find it there. If you two would wait backstage just a moment, I would love to thank you a little bit more detailed in just a moment. Okay, so let me wrap this up. This series is presented free of charge to our community, and it's supported by donations from listeners like you. We do hope that you'll join us for more of our upcoming programs, and you can find our calendar of events on our website, which I believe we're dropping into the comments now. Our final cottage chat is a special one to wrap up our second year. I'll be joined by our illustrious board chair and fellow alumna, Sarah Liddy Bomanika, and Hedgebrook's fabulous leader, Kimberly A.C. Wilson, both phenomenal writers and creatives in their own right. We hope you'll join us right here for a conversation about Hedgebrook's bright future and community on Thursday, October 20th at 4 p.m. Pacific.